Your book opens up with a little big vignette about Charlemagne. He was perhaps the biggest empire builder. Actually, he was the biggest empire builder Europe had between the time of the Caesars and the time of Napoleon. His empire included what is today France, Italy, most of Italy, not all of it, Italy, France, and Germany. On Christmas Day in the year 800, he was crowned king of the Romans, or crowned emperor of the Romans. And what's significant about it, it's the first time a Frankish king had been crowned Roman emperor. There had not been a Western person crowned Roman emperor since 476. The Pope was trying to say that the old Roman Empire has revived, even though a Roman is not the head of it. But the old Roman Empire has revived, and some people believe this was the beginning of an institution that was later to be called the Holy Roman Empire, which we will be talking about. The Holy Roman Empire was to last from 800 to 1802, when Napoleon finally abolished the title. And it was an attempt by the church. 1802. In 1802, Napoleon abolished the title. But it was an attempt by the church to revive the Roman Empire, and it really would not revive. The past oftentimes cannot be restored. But Charlemagne, if anyone deserved the title, he did. A lot of the emperors who came later were hardly worthy of the title. The Holy Roman Empire was known as neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. All right. When we left with Rome, though, last time, I'm now on page 328, starting the chapter, German barbarians overran the Roman Empire and began to set up their own kingdoms. On the one hand, there was the kingdom of the Franks, from which we get the word France. There was the Ostrogoths, Visigoths, two branches of the tribe called the Goths. The Ostrogoths, the Visigoths. The Visigoths went in and took over much of Spain. The Ostrogoths went into Italy and took over much of Italy. And they began to replace the Romans, and eventually, thanks to the influence of the Ostrogoths, Latin ceased to be spoken, and a new language emerged called Italian. Now, the church, and again, in no way, folk, don't mean to be knocking the church, but I'm just saying the fact, the church tried hard to keep the Latin language from dying, and they insisted that Latin be used in their worship services, and it was for hundreds of years. And they insisted only the Latin Bible was really a valid Bible, and wouldn't allow the Bible to be printed in native tongues. And again, this may have set back knowledge of the scriptures for some hundreds of years. But they tried everything they could reasonably to keep the Latin language from dying, but it died. Now in Europe today, you have two big families of languages. Your Latin languages, which includes Italian and Spanish and Portuguese and French. These are Latin languages. And your German languages, which includes German and English, and a lot of your Scandinavian tongues. Now there are some languages spoken in Europe that are not related to any one of these. Basque, for instance, your book mentions the Basque who lived here in northern Spain. Their language family is not related to anything we know about. And of course over here in Eastern Europe there are a bunch of languages spoken that are not related to either German or Latin. But the Germanic people slowly took over. Now in Great Britain, the Romans realized they couldn't hold Britain, so they abandoned Britain. The people living there, called the Britons, had to try to hold off the Germans without Roman help. But among the tribes that came in, the German tribes were the Angles, from which we get the word Angleland, or England. Angles. I'm not going to write, but the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. We sometimes call the English people the Anglo-Saxons. And they began to set up a bunch of kingdoms here in England. And these kingdoms were at war with each other. For 300 years, England had a bunch of kingdoms. Now, folk, I want to digress a little bit because history tells, pardon, not history, but legend. All right, here's the point I want to make. You have history. That's what a lot of people believe is to be established fact. You have legend. That's what people aren't sure is a fact or not. Of course, there's myth. Now, I can promise this will probably be, some of this will be on your final exam. Myths are stories involving gods. Legends are stories involving heroes. Some of your heroes were part God and part human. History is what generally we today believe to be true. So what we believe about the history of early England was that the Romans left. When the Romans left, Germanic tribes moved in. The British people tried to keep the Germanic tribes out, but they were overwhelmed. Now, then there's tradition. Tradition is a story that is handed down by word of mouth for several generations before someone writes it down. In other words, it's not an original source. History is supposedly made up of original sources. We read what somebody at the time wrote. Now, what I'm getting at, folks, is one of the more famous stories of all time that was not written down as far as over 300 years till it was told. The people of Europe used to gather around their campfires when they're moving about, or at the end of the day, they all gather around the campfire. They had no TV, they had no radio, they had no internet, so they entertained themselves with telling stories. The story I'm about to tell you is one of the most famous stories to come from this time period. According to tradition, one of the British kings who tried to keep out the Germans was a king named Arthur. All right. Arthur supposedly was a son of the former king Uther Pendragon, but Uther died right about the time Arthur was born. Now, here's the way that, folk, I'm going to tell this story in what I call raw format. I'm going to tell it the way you would have heard it probably had you lived at the time. I'm not going to tell it the way modern writers would tell it. You know, I've read books where they tell it, but I'm going to tell it the way that you would have heard it. Essentially, I'll begin the story with Merlin, the sorcerer at the time. According to the story, Merlin's father was a fallen angel who cohabited with an earth woman. Again, folks, this, as far as we know, is the last time this story was told. I mean, Alexander the Great, supposedly his father was Zeus, and Hercules supposedly was this, in this case. And Satan thought, I've got my Antichrist here, and with him I'll rule the world. Instead, Merlin's mother attended Mass regularly, attended church, and when Merlin was born, instead of becoming Satan's agent, he became a Christian. But he had unusual powers. And when Uther Pendragon died, Merlin gave Uther's baby, the young Arthur, to Sir Ector and said, Sir Ector, I'm not telling you who this boy, you raise him, and then when the time's right, I'll call for him. All right, then Merlin wedged a sword in a stone and put the stone in a churchyard. And he told the people, now the person who can pull this sword out of the stone is the rightful heir to the throne of England. Well, for many years, many persons tried to pull the sword. In fact, for about 15 years, England had no king. Then we come to the day of a big party. Young Arthur waited with challenge and patience. Now, Arthur believed that Sir Ector was his father, but his older brother had just been knighted. So his older brother, Sir Kay, had just been knighted. Anyway, they arrived at the party, and Sir Kay reached for his sword that he thought was under his tunic. Dad, I don't have my sword. So Sir Ector turned to young Arthur and said, Arthur, go home and fetch your sword. And Arthur thought, what a terrible stroke of luck. I'm the one, and he's the one who forgot the sword, and I'm the one who has to fetch it. But he had to protect his brother's honor. It was a disgrace for a knight to forget his sword. So Arthur remembered all of a sudden, hey, there's a sword wedged in a stone to churchyard, and besides that, haven't I heard that anything sitting in a church belongs to everybody, the whole, anyone that can, as long as I put it back when I'm through with it, what harm is there I take it? And beside the churchyard was right near where the party was. So he went to the churchyard. This account goes, he reached over with one hand, pulled a sword out of the stone. Then, of course, to carry a sword safe, you have to put it high in the air. So he held the sword high in the air and ran pell-mell back to the party, thinking, hey, this is great. This didn't take long, and I'll not miss much. He didn't know that once he got there, the party would be over. So there he burst into the clearing with his sword high in the air, heading for his family. And he didn't notice everybody who saw him started grabbing everybody's attention, pointing at him. Didn't notice that the whole crowd, great and small, started following him. He didn't notice anything was wrong until he got to his family. His dad said, "Arthur, where did you get this?" "Dad, I promise I'll put it back when I'm through with it. Nobody will miss it." "Son, did you pull the sword out of the stone in the churchyard?" At this point, Arthur suddenly became aware that the whole crowd was looking at him, great and small, that whatever he had done, he was the center of attention. Well, the highest up of the nobility got their heads together and said, "Hey, let's go back to the church." So they all went to the church. Someone wedged the sword back in the stone. Again, several persons tried to pull it out. Nobody could. "All right, Arthur, you're tried again." Arthur pulled it out the same way before, really easily, one hand, and everybody gave a collective gasp. They tried their experiment several times until they finally go, "Hey, some real magic is being done here." They finally said, one of the old men said, "I always thought that boy looked like Arthur." Finally, Sir Ector said to young Arthur, "Arthur, I got something to tell you. I'm not your father." "But Dad, who is?" "Well, it looks like your father was the former King Uther Pendragon." They began to make plans to move Arthur and his family to the palace called Camelot, and Arthur went on to become the most famous king England ever had. All right, this is a story the way you'd have heard it hundreds of years ago. How much of it can I believe? How much of it you believe depends on your worldview. I want to remind you of something though, folk. Every ancient society begins its history with the type of stories I've just told you. Now, having said that, how many of you have read this story before? Nearly every hand in the room has gone up. Not everybody, but almost everybody. Yeah. Again, the last time I researched Arthur, some web page I went to said it's obvious to me that Arthur did not exist. I want to remind you, simple, philosophically, you cannot prove a negative. You cannot prove somebody did not exist unless you could actually go back in time and see. Arthur, nope, we have not found a castle called Camelot. But we have found a battlefield that's supposedly where Arthur fought the Germans and won. And what's more, it is known that for 40 years, no German tribe successfully went into England. Somebody, apparently in England, held them off for 40 years. These are circumstances. We still have not found a coin with Arthur's name on it. We have not found Camelot, even though there have been persons who say that they think they know where the castle might be located. It's actually located more in Scotland than it is Britain. But again, it depends on who you read and when you read it. As for the Britons, though, they eventually were moved into Wales and into Brittany. Brittany's over here. They were eventually moved out. And the Anglo-Saxon Jutes, the Picts, came in, the Scots, and they set up a bunch of kingdoms in Britain that were to rule Britain for some 300 years before finally King Egbert united all of them. All right. The Franks. Oh, by the way, does anyone have any comments about Arthur? You might have heard a slightly different version of the story. Any comments about anything that I've said so far? I can promise, I mean, the name Arthur and Merlin is on the test, whether you'll see it or not. I mean, I'm giving you persons who are here a little bit of favoritism. I mean, yes?
There was a debate if Arthur was real, he may or may not have been a centurion.
A what?
A centurion, one of the Roman soldiers just stayed behind.
Yeah,
Because the Romans were known for filling their ranks with conquered people that they used as.
Oh, you're saying that some of the people who made up the Roman army might have been Britons? Yeah, that might be the case. And of course, if you study Arthur, you'll get into stories of Sir Lancelot, Sir Tristram, Queen Guinevere. In fact, when Kennedy was president, they said our country, unknown at the time, had a king-lot. A king and a queen and some lords and ladies behaving as they should not have sometimes. What?
We didn't have an Excalibur.
We didn't have an Excalibur, no. No, and we hardly had a Merlin. But we had a castle known as the White House. And anyway.